Last year, Skyrim had its 14th anniversary, which not only made me panic about the fleeting passage of time, but also made me want to jump back into the magical world of Tamriel. However, as I started up my newest playthrough, created my character, escaped Helgen, and made my way to Whiterun, I heard something that piqued my interest.
You look rather pale. Could be ataxia.
Hearing that line threw me for a loop, because in a game like Skyrim with so many fantastical elements, like dragons, magic, and homeownership, hearing a real-life neurological condition like ataxia kind of feels out of place. It's also made stranger by the fact that it's the only real disease to exist in Skyrim. Or is it? There's a ton of strange diseases with weird symptoms that exist in the real world, so is it possible the diseases of Skyrim exist in reality under a different name? That's the question I'm here to answer, so I'm going from Dovahkiin to Doctor to diagnose every Skyrim disease with its real-world equivalent. In Skyrim, diseases are a specific class of debuff that you get rid of with a Cure Disease potion, worshipping at a holy shrine, or another similar effect. There are 8 unique diseases in Skyrim, 9 if you include lycanthropy, and 10 if you include cut content, but I'm not, so 8. I'll be going through each disease in mostly alphabetical order, starting with the impetus of our video, Ataxia. We already know what disease ataxia is, so I used it as my baseline for developing a diagnosis strategy. I took the in-game effects of the disease, translated those into real-world disease symptoms, and examined the in-game source of the disease. After I had all that information, I did my best to research what disease in reality best fit the bill. The in-game effect of ataxia is a 25% decrease to your lockpicking and pickpocketing ability. I interpreted this 25% decrease as a loss of fine motor skills. This matches up really nicely into one of the real-world symptoms of ataxia, a loss in general coordination. Now, there are multiple ways you can contract ataxia in real life, such as genetic factors, a stroke, or through substance abuse. But the only way to contract it in-game is by being attacked by skeevers, spiders, and slaughterfish. Actually, that's a little bit of a lie. Yes, those are the only 3 creatures that can infect you with it, but you can also get ataxia from various traps. In fact, you can get nearly every disease in the game through various traps, which include, but are not limited to, bear traps, floor claws, wall darts, bone spikes, spike walls, spinning blades, swinging blades, wall spears, and so much more. I wanted to mention that the traps exist, but also mention that I'm not taking them into account as a disease source. Because you could in theory get every single sickness from a rusty bear trap, I could look at every disease on this list and go, oops, all tetanus. And I don't want to do that, so I'm not gonna. Anyways, the final source of ataxia is exposure to certain toxins, and every single animal I mentioned has a way of transmitting poison or venom to the player that could induce ataxia in theory. Frostbite spiders are the most visibly toxic of the 3. Not only can they do direct poison damage to you, a vial of frostbite venom is the only thing you can loot from their bodies most of the time. Slaughterfish, on the other hand, can't induce the poison condition in-game, but their scales and eggs do cause poison-adjacent effects, and show slaughterfish have some natural resistance to poison. This hints at the idea that they produce and resist their own venom. Lastly, I think skeevers are carriers of toxins like frostbite spider venom and transmit that poison to the player when attacking them. Looking again at the alchemical properties of the disease carriers, charred skeever hide can both cure disease and resist poison, and skeever tails give near exclusively poisoning effects. I think this shows that skeevers are constantly exposed to different poisons, either through traps meant to kill them, or from frostbite spiders they share dungeons with, but have such an insane immune system they're able to keep living and spreading ataxia despite being more toxic than insert fandom name here. Now that we've ran through the process of how to diagnose our only confirmed disease, let's move on to our first fully fictional disease, bone break fever. This disease is exclusively carried by the bears of Skyrim. The in-game effect is a 25-point drain from your stamina, making it harder to sprint, perform charge attacks, or carry as much as you were able to before. This means the definitive symptoms of the disease are lethargy, loss of strength, and presumably because it's part of the name, fever and some sort of bone weakness. There are a few different schools of thought I employed while researching what disease this could be. At first, I just looked up if there were any diseases exclusively contracted from bears, and though there was one, it doesn't fit what we're looking for. Trichinosis is a disease caused by ingesting undercooked bear meat that's been infected with the Trichinella worm larvae. Some of the symptoms line up, like a fever and muscle pain that would make it harder to swing a sword or carry your cheese wheels, but there's nothing related to bones. Trichinosis also comes from you eating a bear, not a bear attempting to eat you. so the mode of infection doesn't exactly line up with what happens in-game. I kept going down different rabbit holes to try to find which disease best match up with the symptoms that we're looking for, but nothing really fit the bill. We already said trichinosis doesn't work, osteoporosis doesn't cause a fever, chronic fatigue syndrome doesn't affect the bones. There was nothing I could find that lined up with what we're looking for. I was getting frustrated thinking that I was going to have to diagnose my first unknown disease as something truly fictional. Until I realized something. Most Skyrim diseases follow a very literal naming scheme, and I was interpreting bone break fever to be a fever that makes your bones break. But what if it should be interpreted as a fever from a broken bone? Bone break fever is just a broken bone. Yes, breaking a bone isn't a disease, but Skyrim plays hard and loose with what it considers to be a disease, and when you think about it, it lines up perfectly with what we're looking for. Breaking any significant bone would limit your strength, making it harder to carry items and perform attacks. And if it got infected, the ensuing fever would make you lethargic. Though it does seem strange when other creatures you fight in Skyrim can break the laws of physics, only a bear can break a bone. Ignoring realism, we've diagnosed our second disease and are now moving on to brain rot. In addition to being the same thing that's infected the For You page of my TikTok, it's also a disease exclusively contracted from the half-bird, half-old woman monstrosities that are hag ravens. The effect of brain rot is a 25% decrease to your magic meter. Magic is your ability to cast spells, and because most spells are all either learned from books or the College of Winterhold, it makes sense to me that magic is most closely related to intelligence and the mind. Thusly, a disease called brain rot that hinders your magic translates to its real-world symptoms being something like decreased mental capacity and headaches/migraines, since that's what the disease likely literally feels like. No hag ravens exist in real life, aside from my lunchroom monitor I had when I was in 7th grade, and I don't have her number, so I can't ask her what diseases she's prone to. Instead, I started looking at diseases closely associated with real ravens to try to find brain rot's equivalent, and I'm very happy to say I think I found a perfect match. West Nile virus. That's probably the only time anybody's been in a good mood about West Nile virus, huh? I've always associated West Nile virus as something you get from mosquitoes, but it actually infects over 250 species of birds, with corvids like crows, blue jays, and ravens being most susceptible to dying from it. It's not as common to get West Nile from a raven compared to a mosquito, but it's also not common to get attacked by a hybrid magic bird woman, so suspend your disbelief. Symptoms include a fever, headache, and body pains as if you had the flu. In severe cases, those infected experience meningitis, a swelling of the brain and spinal cord that causes general stupor and disorientation. That nasty collection of symptoms sounds exactly like something the very literal doctors of Skyrim would call brain rot, and would definitely affect the amount of fireballs you could cast. With brain rot officially diagnosed as West Nile, we're sailing away from Skyrim to the neighboring island of Solstheim to diagnose our next disease. The Dragonborn DLC introduced us to our fourth disease, Droops. Droops is exclusively contracted from ashhoppers, the giant grasshopper-like bugs native to Solstheim. The in-game effect is damage from one-handed and two-handed weapons is lowered by 15%, and presumably, parts of your face start to droop. The damage reduction of Droops does not affect unarmed attacks, however, only attacks made with a held melee weapon. This leads me to believe that in addition to facial drooping, Droops causes a loss in general coordination, not overall strength. And I think I found the perfect candidate for these symptoms: Summit Disease. Summit Disease is a fungal infection found in grasshoppers exposed to the Entomophaga grilli fungus. Yeah, I probably got that right. It hijacks control of the grasshopper's body and has it climb to the top of a nearby plant until it reaches the summit. Once at the summit, the grasshopper is terminated, the fungus is germinated, and the spores are propagated into the soil, ready to repeat the process for the next unlucky grasshopper to cross their path. If an ashhopper infected with a nervous system commandeering fungus spread that to the player character, that would perfectly account for the symptoms we're looking for. There is just one issue. Does a fungus like this actually exist? In Skyrim? No. In Solstheim? Yes. Located all across Solstheim are collections of a fungus unique to the island: ash creep clusters. Both the ash hoppers and clusters can be found in the same locations, so it can be assumed that these very hungry ashy critters would make a meal of the fungus, get infected with the spores, and spread the disease to the player. Instead of turning the player into a zombie like other video game fungi would, the disease manifests as a loss of coordination and looking droopy due to facial nerve damage. It's a bit of a long-winded diagnosis, but I feel like Droops being summit disease is my most airtight diagnosis so far. We've reached the halfway point of our diagnosing adventure, and as a treat, I deserve a crash out. What in God's name is a chaurus? Chaurus, for the uninitiated, are the weird bugs the farmer keep as pets. But what kind of bug is this? If you look at their in-game design, they look like an earwig, and my nightmares had a chitinous chimera baby that the wiki calls an insect, but it can't be. The bare minimum amount of legs for any insect is 6, and the standard chaurus obviously only has 4. Maybe the pincers on its tail count as legs. No, they're counted as pincers. That's why they're called pincers. If they were legs, they would be called legs. They get even weirder when we find out that all the chaurus we originally saw in the base game were all larvae that pupate to become chaurus hunters in the Dragonborn DLC. Now we're introduced to a whole additional stage of their life cycle we had no idea about, where they turn into this mantis-wasp hybrid who is still an uncategorized arthropod with not enough legs. And at what point do they begin this stage of their life cycle? The loading screen fun fact says it's at the end of their life, but what counts as the end of their life? It's not like caterpillars where after they eat so much and get big enough, they make a cocoon to turn into a butterfly, because we see a ridiculously sized Chaurus Reaper under the Frostflow Lighthouse who is so full of life he couldn't wait to take mine. Anyway, they give you rattles. The symptoms of rattles are stamina regeneration being cut in half and presumably full body tremors. I was talking to an old friend of mine who also happens to be an epidemiologist around the time I was doing rattles research. He immediately suggested rattles could be Lyme neuroborreliosis, a secondary condition brought on by Lyme disease. Because Lyme disease is notoriously spread through tick bites, I guess chaurus are ticks now. They're not, but I don't care anymore. That's a lie. I do care, and I'm going to be upset about this for a while. Common Lyme disease symptoms include fever, lethargy, and muscle pains, which correlate to rattles' lowered rate of stamina regeneration. Advanced stages of Lyme disease, like neuroborreliosis, also cause full-body tremors and seizures, just like the other main symptom for rattles. With all that information considered, it's safe to say rattles is Skyrim's version of Super Lyme disease, and I can finally stop talking about that bug I hate. Next is Rockjoint, which is probably the first disease most players encountered in Skyrim. This is due to the fact that it has the most disease carriers, being spread through foxes, skeevers, bears, wolves, and horkers. Rockjoint is also, to my knowledge, the most frequently mentioned disease in-game, with vendors advertising Rockjoint-free meat, passing NPCs mention it to you as idle dialogue, and it was the cause of death of Miko's original owner. Rockjoint's in-game effect is a 25% decrease to melee weapon damage, just like Droops, but stronger. While we've established Droops' damage deduction is caused by a slime mold growing on your nervous system, Rockjoint's roughhousing reduction is likely caused by your joints feeling rocky. It's a crazy assumption, and I will not explain my reasoning. The big thing we're looking to find here is a disease you get from a variety of mammals that gives you stiff joints. I immediately thought Rockjoint could be rabies. It's, in my opinion, the disease most associated with being bitten by a wild animal. But the symptoms at any of its stages don't quite line up with what we're looking for. I later came across septic arthritis, a joint infection caused by untreated wounds like animal bites. The real-world symptoms of septic arthritis are discomfort, swelling, and difficulty using the afflicted joint. Fatal complications can arise if left untreated, which lines up with the in-game information about Rockjoint since we know of at least one confirmed death caused by it. With all that evidence pointing towards Rockjoint and septic arthritis being one and the same, we can move on to our next disease that is also contracted from a woodland mammal. Whipbane is the signature disease of Skyrim's saber cats. Its in-game effect is a 50% debuff to your magic regeneration speed. Because we've established that magic is linked to the mind, and Whipbane is a bane to your wits, I'm interpreting Whipbane as a loss of cognitive function, like you can't think quickly or are lost in a mental haze. Now, for the past 2 years, I have been a proud cat dad to my son, Hubble. He is a wonderful young man with one terrible flaw. If he eats any meat, he poops everywhere. It took months to get a proper diagnosis for his stomach problems, and in those months of vet visits and forbidden Hershey's Kisses left on my couch, I learned way too much about diseases related to cat poop. One of those diseases is what I believe to be the real-world equivalent of Whipbane, toxoplasmosis. Bet you thought that unrelated tangent was just so I could talk about my cat, huh? Well, it was. But it was a funny segue, too. Toxoplasmosis is a disease humans get after coming into contact with cat feces infected by the Toxoplasma parasite. Cats also get it through contact with infected feces, like humans do, or by eating something like a mouse that's already been infected with the parasite. There is a litany of terrible side effects that come with toxoplasmosis, like fever, headache, eye pain, breathing problems, and inflammation of the brain. This inflammation, also known as encephalitis, is similar to the meningitis caused by brain rot, the other magic-affecting disease we talked about earlier. Encephalitis results in confusion, seizures, and other cerebral side effects that match up with Whipbane's symptoms. If we're willing to believe that saber cats always forget to wash their hands after using the bathroom and attack you with caca-covered claws, toxoplasmosis fits the bill for Whipbane pretty well. And for our final disease to be diagnosed, I've saved the most complex disease in all of Skyrim for last: Sanguinare vampiris. I bet you can guess what monster gives this to you. Sanguinare comes from sanguis, meaning blood in Latin, and vampiris comes from vampire, meaning vampire in English. It's likely a blood-related illness due to the name, and let's be honest, what other kind of disease would vampires have? It's also the only disease with multiple stages, growing stronger and stronger over the course of 3 days until it becomes almost incurable. Because Sanguinare vampiris is a mouthful, I'm going to abbreviate it for the rest of the video as SV. In SV's earliest stages, its negative effects are a -25 to your health points, inability to heal in sunlight, pale skin, red or yellow eyes, and weakness to fire. The face of the infected also changes, becoming more sunken and gaunt for the player, and looking more bat-like for most other vampires. The positive effects are heightened resistance to disease, poison, frost, stronger illusion casting, better sneaking ability, and a handful of vampire-related spells. You also grow fangs. Not sure if that's a positive or a negative, but it's there. Hey there, this is Editing Trent just popping in here to say I got my wires a little crossed due to there being more than just one stage/form of vampirism, so I'm here to correct a few things before going forward. Standard vampirism is just as curable as any disease in Skyrim, but the Lord version of vampirism from the Dawnguard DLC is what's near incurable. Also, the only symptom of base SV is the deduction to your health, while everything else I said applies to either the standard or the Lord form of vampirism. These mistakes won't affect the diagnosing strategy or the final diagnosis I give at the end, but I wanted to clarify this mistake I realized while editing this. Anyways, back to the video. SV, and by extension vampirism, are the only diseases that come with any sort of benefit, let alone magical ones. These are because of lore reasons I won't dive too deep into, but in summary, vampirism in Skyrim is connected to the Daedric Lord of Dominion and Corruption, Molag Bal. He created the first full-blooded vampires through means too demonstrable and demonetizable to describe, and his hand in their creation is the reason all vampires possess their magical traits. Additionally, the disease corrupts your very soul, turning you into an undead that feeds on blood and the life force of others to replace your own. Because of the magic and the undead factors, there's no way we can wholly diagnose all the symptoms of SV to find a real-world analog. Instead of diagnosing the whole, I'm going to separate the side effects into magic I'm being leased by the devil and something a real disease can do, to hopefully get us something we can work with. Here's a list of everything I'm counting as devil magic. Nearly everything considered to be a boon with vampirism comes from the fact that the devil is paying you back for sucking your soul. I'm interpreting the resistances as beneficial side effects of said soul getting sucked and becoming undead, therefore making diseases and poisons unable to harm you as they would a living body. The cold and fire affecting you differently also represents how you are now a walking corpse who biologically prefers night and is hated by the sun. And because of this magical lack of life force, you're lusted for the blood of others and have fangs to get it when you can. Lastly, I originally wasn't going to count eye color changing as a magical vampire trait, but then I realized something. Nearly all types of undead in Skyrim have glowing eyes of various colors, meaning the unique eyes of vampires are a trait related to them being undead, and not something that should be treated as a disease symptom. Now for the list of symptoms we can work with. I'm interpreting the sun sensitivity as separate from the fire weakness because there's a difference between being easily sunburnt and being easily flammable. The lowered health is analogous for an overall weakened constitution and is likely related to the pale skin and sunken face. I've also added contracted through blood to the list. It's not necessarily a symptom, but it's a trait with the disease we're looking for. With our list defined of what could and couldn't exist in a real-world disease, let's start our diagnosing. I'm far from the first person to ask what disease vampirism could be. Laura Snyder with Visible Body wrote a wonderful article laying out 3 different diseases that correlate to separate aspects of vampirism. Rabies is transmitted through bites and blood-on-blood contact and causes the infected to become agitated, as if they hunger for blood. Those plagued with tuberculosis in the 1800s thought the disease was a result of a supernatural creature draining their life force, causing their bodies to become weak, fevered, and cough up blood. The third disease, and the most vampire-like of all, is porphyria. literally nicknamed vampire disease. It's a rare inherited blood disorder where molecules called porphyrins build up across the body and hinder the production of heme, a key component of the hemoglobin that distributes oxygen throughout your bloodstream. There are two types of porphyria: acute, which mostly affects the nervous system, and cutaneous, which mostly affects the skin. Acute matches some of our symptoms, like fever, weakness, nausea, and vomiting. These symptoms would make you appear gaunt, pale, and have a lower bodily constitution as if you had SV. Cutaneous porphyria, on the other hand, causes skin to burn, swell, and blister when exposed to the sun, which is also just like SV. If you combine both types of porphyria into one awful illness, it would be the perfect real-life counterpart to Skyrim's blood-sucking sickness. Now, I know what you're thinking. Trent, porphyria is an inherited disease, not one you could contract through a bite like in-game. Also, why are you making me sound like this? To that, I say it doesn't matter. Because in the game, it doesn't matter. A rule I set for myself at the beginning of all this diagnosing was that because these are all Skyrim diseases, I am only allowed to work with information available to me in Skyrim. If I allow myself to break this rule once and go back to the previous Elder Scrolls game, we can see there's no SV in Oblivion. That's because the disease that leads to vampirism in Oblivion is porphyric hemophilia, a combination of porphyria and hemophilia, two genetic blood disorders that can't be transmitted through a bite in real life, but can in game. This tells me two things. 1. SV is 100% a version of super porphyria. And 2, I care more about being accurate with the diseases of Skyrim more than Skyrim does. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's been made clear through this whole process of finding which disease is what between Skyrim and reality that the developers put genuine thought and care into creating this oftentimes forgotten aspect of the game. They did the best job they could at making each disease feel unique in how they hinder the player, without the debuffs being so plentiful that they turn what's supposed to be an immersive feature into a game-wrecking nuisance. Nobody wants to deal with all the symptoms of West Nile or question the legitimacy of getting a fungal infection from a grasshopper bite. We play games to have fun and explore worlds constructed just for us. The world of Skyrim is a living, breathing place we get to adventure in, and, in an odd way, the diseases in it enforce that. Diseases remind us that no matter how many dragon souls we consume, we're not immortal. Every fever, sniffle, and sneeze tells us we're not going to be around forever, so it's important to stay healthy and enjoy the ride while it lasts. Or become a werewolf so you never get sick.